Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome to episode 104 of the Great Linear Song of Ice and Fire reread brought to you by the Vassals of Kingsgrave. My name is Bina007 and I'll be your host today, and I am joined by Mary,
Hi, it's Nymeria on the forum.
by Vali,
Matt in real life.
by Michal,
Inkasrain on the forums, reporting from quarantine in New York City.
by Sara,
Hey, it's Sara, DrBlood on the forums.
by Adam,
This is Adam, DrownedSnow.
and by Casey.
Hey, this is Casey, Blue-Eyed Queen on the forums.
It's especially exciting to have Casey back on because it feels like, can you remember what episode you were on last, Casey? It feels like ages.
Oh my god, I don't know. I think I was on a couple other Vox since I've been on the reread, but
Taking
been
a little
crazy
podcast
without
break.
the coronavirus.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I'm getting very sentimental because today I finished reading all the chapters in the linear reread. So I did this week's and next week's, which was just very. I put the book away on the shelf and I felt very emotional about it. But it's also a very good opportunity to thank everyone who has joined me in curating this reread. 106 episodes of podcasts don't happen on their own, and the listeners may or may not know, but we have some amazing curators that have made sure that episodes get organized, that they get edited, that they get published in good time and good order. And as anything this long running, the people who have been involved have really kind of varied over time as their lives and work commitments and general enthusiasm for the books has kind of waned and wavered. But I really wanted to say a massive thank you to all of them. Some of them are on the podcast today. Anyway, I want to thank Adam, DrownedSnow, Casey, who are on the podcast, Mary, obviously, who joined later in the series, and Sara also. I want to also thank people who aren't on the podcast today. So James, Nadia, Sir Patrick the Tall, and Sarah Lady Weaver. And all of these people have kind of over 104 episodes at various points dropped in and out of really making this happen. So I just want to thank them all because this has been by far the most epic thing I've done as a hobby for the last few years of my life. And it's been really amazing to share that burden with everyone. And no, Matt, White Raven is not a curator of the reread.
And you aren't either.
Yeah, we drafted in Vali because, as I said to him, Vali is very much the Sam to my Frodo of this journey, but without the gay sex.
Oh.
And I'm sure Hannah, Shadow Baby.
I have the wrong copy of Lord of the
Carry
Rings.
the load.
Hannah Shadow Baby, who's doing some kind of weird stats and kind of anecdotes for the final episode, is going to work out who's been hosting all of these. But I think that it feels like Vali and I have been on all of these together, basically from the start. And at one point, he threatened to drop out of Dance with Dragons because he found it so dull. But he's always been my stalwart when no one takes a chapter to be on. So thank you, Matt.
I'm here for you always, Bina.
Oh, yeah. So anyway, I feel so sentimental today. I really do. Oh,
Bina's such a sap.
I am. I feel very sappy today. I feel my reread has ended. I mean, there's 2 more episodes to record after this, but it does feel like end of an era. Anywho, let's jump into this shit. In this episode, it's going to be all John all of the time. We're back to Dance with Dragons. It's going to be John 10 and 11, which actually, if you look at my edition of the book, which is a paperback, it's in 2 editions. The John chapters really are spread throughout that book, so they're not close together at all. But the events all take place over the 13th to 17th of August 300 AL. As ever, we could potentially spoil anything in George R. R. Martin's published series. We will probably not spoil the show unless clearly marked in an aftershow. We might do that, I guess, given the subjects today. But if we do, those people who have not yet watched the show will be warned to stay away, including some of our fellow podcasters. So we will save it for the very end. Anyway, let's crack on. Let's begin with John 10, and it is Sara, DrBlood, with the chapter recap.
All right, well, a completely COVID-free chapter summary coming at you. This chapter begins in the midst of the wedding ceremony performed by Melisandre for Alice Karstark, and what the hell? Hold on, let me start again. Sorry, my autocorrect just went insane. Hold on, stand by. What is the Magnar of Then's name? Because it's certainly not Sign. which is what it says now.
Sigurd.
Sigurn?
Sigurd?
Sure.
Yeah.
Right?
No,
Sigurn.
he was the old one. Sigurd. All right.
Right.
This
right.
chapter begins. Shh. Okay. This chapter begins in the midst of the wedding ceremony, performed by Melisandre for Alice Karstark and Sigurn, the young Magnar of Then. As he listens to the Red Woman's chanting, John reflects on the fervor and coldness of Queen Selyse and takes careful note of the Black brothers who have and have not chosen to join the gathering. As Alice assures John that her new husband should be more afraid of her than she is of him, the Lord Commander ruminates painfully on her similarities to his fierce sister Arya. The ceremony concludes with the exchange of cloaks and a leap over the fire pit. John has brief words with Melisandre, who repeats the Azor Ahai prophecy, laments that her visions in the fire are filled only with snow, and cautions John again about the danger that she has foreseen for him. John goes to visit Alice's uncle, Cregan Karstark, in the ice cells, and then joins the wedding feast, where he watches old Nori and old Flint enjoy Southron wine and the guests dancing. As the feast continues, Alice reflects that the Thens are more like Northerners than the other wildlings and promises continued support for the Night's Watch and gratitude for John's help. John receives word from Eastwatch that 11 ships have set sail for Hardhome, and Sir Axel makes a gross attempt at arranging a marriage for himself with Val. The chapter ends with 2 horn blasts from the Watchers on the Wall, signaling that Tormund has arrived to negotiate. The end.
Pretty good. Epic. What is up with Melisandre's patch face doom vision where she sees skulls around him?
Oh my god. Patchface is... I don't know. There's something about Patchface in my chapter 2 that I'm like, I don't know what's going on with him.
Is it because he's dead already? Like because he actually died?
I think that's part of it. I think he might also be part of the sleeping death that Val refers to in the next chapter.
Oh, that's...
Like he has grayscale?
Or he'll
It's stealing my
get
thunder.
yell from Shireen and be part of spreading it.
Ooh. I feel like
That's my theory.
I feel like the storm god is one of the closest things to the great other that we've seen as far as like the theology is concerned. Like he seems dangerous in a way that Relord doesn't necessarily. I don't know why I have that impression, but
the storm god that is Storm's Landing is different from the storm god of the Iron Islands, right?
yeah. But the iron. Oh, I see. Is it?
I thought so. Because the storm god of the Storm's... what was it? Storm's End got mad because his daughter, the first... Fuck, I'm going to get this wrong. Durandon or whatever?
Durandon.
Durandon?
You're right.
Durandon,
Yes.
yeah.
And I think
Durandon
you're right.
Yeah.
I think you're right, Matt. It's not the same. They are not the same.
Because he's the drowned god.
Yeah,
That's the
and not
problem.
the storm
But
god.
the drowned god has his adversary in the storm god, and that's what they think took Balon Greyjoy.
Okay. But then, so who do they think helped Patchface? The drowned god? Or do we think that, like, have they speculated at all? They
I
just
don't
think
know. I
he
thought you just speculated it.
Okay. No, but I mean, I feel like that there's sort of rampant foil about Patchface, and I'm getting confused about like what's established. It just established that he washed up weird, right? Like that's the only thing that's.
Yeah, he was different. Like he's like before he was like nimble and agile and really clever, and now he's kind of like a lunatic.
Mm-hmm. But we don't know. Nobody has thought to in the story, or in the books. Nobody has thought to like speculate as to why. It's all just fan speculation.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
I
perhaps
got nothing.
perhaps
All right,
we'll, let's maybe bring this back to the meat of the chapter, because obviously
yes.
we're building up this 4-chapter arc in which once you know the ending, you can read in all sorts of foreshadowing and why Jon is getting it wrong and why he's going to end up being murdered by his own men. So I wanted to read out this comment that was actually left on Stefan Sasse's Dance with Dragons reread blog, and it's not by Stefan Sasse, it's a comment left by a reader, but I thought it was really good and I thought we could discuss it. So this is the chapter where Jon clearly crosses the line and starts acting as King of the North rather than Lord Commander. Arranging political marriages and locking up Northmen who object is not the role of the Night's Watch. Yet Jon doesn't acknowledge this in his own mind. In a really remarkable passage, Jon even thinks that he wants to behead Cregan Karstark. He has progressed from executing the insubordinate Slint to wanting to behead someone he has no rightful authority over, someone who is merely getting in the way of his political plans for the North. End quote. And I thought, actually, this really sums up everything I felt uneasy about. And I too was drawn to that sentence, throwaway sentence or two when John's like, I just wish I could get rid of Craig and Karstark. Do you think this is a fair assessment of John right now? Do you think that this charge that he is in his own head, maybe subconsciously acting as a king rather than Lord Commander, is a fair accusation to throw at John at this point?
I think it is a bit, but you also have to wonder, the world is just so different. What, like, would this situation have existed in a more normal setting, like with the previous Lord Commander? And if so, what would he have done with Alice Karstark coming to him for help? Because you can argue that it's also not behaving with honor to like cast her out and say that's your problem.
Yeah, I think the bigger thing is that Cregan came to take a guest that was welcomed by the Night's Watch, and that's against the guest right that is held very strongly in the North.
I mean, that's how John justifies himself. But the fact that he even thinks that he knew he was coming, so he went to him so that he wouldn't have to welcome him and grant Craig and Karstark himself guest right, is it's showing how biased he is in this dispute already. He's not treating that like he should probably.
I think that John's been put in an impossible position with like no one to really, with the realm in disarray under normal times, with the Northmen, fully supporting the Night's Watch, and that this would be more of a big deal. But I think he really has to make decisions, and he can't take direction from a king because there are still 3 kings.
Yeah, I agree. In normal times, the Starks in Winterfell would have taken care of that. And I guess in this situation, he kind of gets into this role because he thinks there's no one else.
I agree.
I think he's operating, and this is sort of what you're saying. Like they've gone into it's almost like a reverted version of the Night's Watch, like a proto Night's Watch that he's running. Where I think that for a long time they were an apolitical entity operating within a very fixed political system, and it was easy for them to stay neutral. But one of the things that really struck me as far as this question is that when he repeats in his mind the Night's Watch vow, he repeats only the first, and the second part is the one that's like, I will have no wives, I will have no lands, I will not take part in the, like all of the very political stuff. But I am the sword in the darkness, I'm the watcher on the walls, I'm the fire that burns bright against the cold, the light that brings the dawn, the horn that wakes the sleepers, and the shield that guards the realms of men. None of that is contrary to what he's doing, I think. And that's the part that he has to repeat when right before he kills Corn Halfhand. That's the part that's like playing over and over again in his head. And I think that in focusing on that, that very foundational definition of the Night's Watch, I think he's doing exactly what he's supposed to be doing. And I think everyone else has forgotten, just like how people have forgotten why the wall is really there and who the real enemies are, not the wildlings, right? They're the others.
I mean, I think that's why it's complicated, right? Because John is not wrong. Like, I don't think the ultimate, like the actions that he comes to, most of them are very defensible, even if they seem radical, because I guess they are radical. I think that the attitude that John is approaching it with, while his values are in the right place, he's also, like, I tend to agree that there is a certain amount of, I don't know, power hungriness, but like power forwardness that the other men of the Night's Watch are sensing. Like, John's human, right? I don't blame him for being like, I wish I could kill Karstark, but at the same time, that is an act, like a very definitive act that he shouldn't be taking at all, or really even considering. It's for me like such a blend of he's right, but he's wrong, and he's not communicating right, and part of that is because his attitude is mostly right but also a little bit wrong, and I know it's very, very complicated. I can't condemn him completely, because I do think that he is right in a lot of ways. I think there's a lot of temptations of power that John thinks he's thrown off that he hasn't necessarily.
Well, I would think that and it comes up time after time in the chapters, is he remembers lessons learned from Eddard Stark while he's teaching Robb to rule. And I think that he was not born to rule, but kind of raised to take power and exercise it efficiently. And he sees that as needing at the Night's Watch and is going ahead with it.
Yeah, I mean, is anything in his attitude? I mean, certainly the ways that he's exercising his power are more radical, as you say, but is anything about his, let's say, imperiousness really all that different from what we saw from Mormont?
But maybe Mormont gets away with it because he's older and therefore is seen as having more right to it. I mean, John at this point is very young and very new in his role and very controversial already. He's shorn himself of all his sidekicks who could act as his ambassadors and lobbyists of his views, like Sam. So,
and I mean, you can argue that Mormont himself got in trouble since his own men killed him. So yes,
sure.
Because of the Fist of the First Man thing, but it was already it is an issue with the Night's Watch. But I think it's clear that John wasn't born to rule, but he's replicating what he saw his father doing, alleged father, all his life in Winterfell, and the way he deals with the lords and the disputes and everything. That's what he's doing unconsciously.
I think his biggest issue is his self-isolation. I feel like yeah, if he had maintained that cohort around him, that it wouldn't seem so dictatorial. But it's so sad because, I mean, on one hand, he's used to kind of being an outsider. And on the other hand, he seems to assume that power necessitates isolation. And I think one of the things that Eddard did that he's not doing is that kind of thing where he sits and eats with his men and he knows everybody, and they know him and they trust him as like a human being. And John is cutting himself off in these ways that he seems, and we hear him saying over and over again, are like necessary as his new role. But I think that's his biggest downfall here.
It also seems like, every time I read this, like I feel like, what if he did this or what if he did that? But every time like I go through those like scenarios in my head, I don't think that it would have ended any better or worse for John during all of this. But like, with a lot of chapters and a lot of characters in these books, I feel like Tyrion especially, like you can kind of see just like where he makes mistakes and you're like, oh, if he really just changed that, the whole outcome would be super different. But John remains to be, I think like this situation is just like so difficult and so in the weeds with politics and, wildling, I guess you can call that racial conflict, stuff like that it's just impossible.
I mean, it's an extremely volatile situation, and definitely like John is dealing with men who continually refer to the status quo as the way things have to be, and their version of the vows as how they have to be. I still think he could have done like, and it's tough also because there's a certain like whiff of destiny around this for me that like no matter what happened, John had to be reborn amidst salt and smoke, and so like somebody had to kill him. I do think he could have approached it. I don't necessarily think he's isolating himself, I think, because he has a chip on his shoulder and thinks he's destined to be hated. Like he does know his men, like from his perspective, he's like, he knows their names, he knows who they are, but he's not communicating that to a lot of people. And he's kind of stuck in this like, well, you hate me already, so as much as I care for you as my subjects, he is a little bit lordly in that way. Which I don't know. I mean, at the same time, he's 16? So it's always hard to be like, man, you dummy.
Yeah, he should just be locked in his tower masturbating like every other 16-year-old.
Shall we get? I know it's very hard to disentangle these chapters, right? But do you all want to get into anything specific on this one? Because at this point, he is still consulting with Celise. He is basically trying to preside over an integration between the Thens and the families of the North, and he's still being I don't know, consultative in a way he isn't in the final chapter, when he just goes and blurts out the pink letter without even telling Celise what he's up to. So if we want to talk about, I think it would be interesting here to talk about John in this chapter versus the next ones, and how he does or doesn't decline or deteriorate, and when specifically you think the conspiracy is hatched. Because at this point, I don't think the conspiracy is hatched again.
It's in my chapter.
Yeah.
The very last John chapter is not on this reread, right? It's on the next.
No, it's on the next one.
Yeah.
But I
okay.
think it's interesting to sort of like look at, in this chapter specifically, I don't think he does anything wrong. I mean, he, like, at this point, the wildlings haven't been let through. He hasn't made that deal. I mean, at this point, do you think there's anything that has sealed his fate? Is it inevitable in this chapter? Because I kind of feel in this chapter, Celise is kind of like okay with what's going on.
To me, like, I think that somehow this is more of an issue for me than the wildlings are, although I know that it's not the case for like the men of the Night's Watch. But I think in a sense is more overstepping his role with dealing with the Karstark issue than he is when he negotiates with the wildlings. But to really answer your question, yes, I agree here. It's not sealed. He's not completely against his own people.
Yeah, I actually agree
he
with
hasn't
that.
let anyone through yet.
And he hasn't even negotiated. So like the next chapter that Matt's doing is like the big negotiation that I think people really start to object to. For now, it's still all very theoretical.
I wonder
The
how
word
much.
traitor isn't used yet.
Yeah, that's true. I wonder
But
how
yeah,
much.
no,
of
I
the-
do think it may, sorry, Sarah, just
No,
like
it's okay, go ahead.
I think that's a good point, Marie, that like from our perspective, it's like it actually is worse to be like meddling in the affairs of the realm rather than to than to follow the letter of the law that is in the Night's Watch vows. And it's interesting that the one inspires ire, whereas the other doesn't. Although to be fair, what actually ends up killing John is meddling in the affairs of the realm.
Yeah, definitely.
I wonder to what extent all of the sort of resentment and concern over what he's doing is exacerbated by the presence of the queen and her men there, because he, on one hand, still seems to be beholden to or answering to Stannis through her, and there's a very externalized eye that's being kept on him and what he's doing and the choices that he's making. And I wonder to what extent seeing that group detached from his authority and reflecting on it and judging it and in some ways even overriding it contributes to the undermining of his authority or the destabilization of his relationship with the Night's Watch as the Lord Commander.
Right. I think it's like the accumulation of stressors both within the watch and outside that are just, makes it into even more of a fire keg that the Night's Watch would actually go ahead and kill him. I mean, you have the others, you have the Queen's men there that are instigating stuff against the Night's Watch and the wildlings. You have the wildlings. It's just too much.
He did, just to maybe contribute to the argument that he's radically overstepping and potentially even taking on a kind of royal authority. I would say the best evidence for that in this chapter specifically is essentially the bestowing of arms on the Magnar. And it happens, or he thinks about it as a kind of a side consequence of the ceremony where they just need a marriage cloak, and so they've got to put something on it. But he essentially establishes a coat of arms for House Then, and that's really not something that he can do. So
I completely agree. When I read that, I just hadn't. It's been a long time since I read these chapters, probably since the Feast Dance reread on the character John, so maybe 5-6 years, and I was kind of shocked. I'd completely forgotten that. And I was like, who made you the Court of Royal Arms? And even, I don't know. I mean, I know he's accepted that Stannis is camping in in the wall, right? So I know that Selyse is there and he has to bow and scrape and doff his cap to her and call her your grace. But he's already made his choice, right? He's already sided with a particular king, frankly, and he's already crossed that line. And I kind of feel from then it's just this deterioration where, whether consciously or subconsciously, he gets more and more back into the feudal practices of his childhood.
Yeah, but I mean, he didn't have a choice to back Stannis or not. Stannis came to him, saved his ass. Like,
Oh yeah,
there's
but
no.
I know, but I think I think there's something about how can I articulate this properly? I think he had no choice but to accept Stannis there. But once Stannis is there and he gets back into that language of your grace and bowing and may I take your leave, and having a sort of a feudal hierarchical presence there, a king there and a queen there, I think it trips him back into a way of thinking that isn't the meritocracy of the wall, that isn't the you leave your house behind. I think it's like a tripwire. It just gets him back into this mindset that is very much of his youth and what he actually knows of houses and loyalties and fealties. And it's really dangerous in a way that he probably didn't realize personally psychologically dangerous, given the oaths that he has taken. And I was kind of shocked reading this chapter at how harshly I was judging Jon, actually, and thinking this was avoidable. You took concrete decisions.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point in terms of what characters acculturate themselves to. It's also interesting to me, and maybe I'm wrong because I haven't reread it in a while, but like, I think Jon is actually way better at dealing with Stannis than he is with Selyse. He's more kind of like, he holds his ground a lot more with Stannis than he does with Selyse, and he's, you know, I guess you could say like, well, it's less important how he treats the queen that the king doesn't particularly like or care for, but it does definitely create, I think, that atmosphere of politics and subservience and, you know, kind of, what's the phrase, like going ahead to get ahead or something like that, you know, and using that language in a way that allows him to accomplish what he needs to, but also, I mean, is a mark of his privilege, right? Like, not everybody in the Watch would be able to use that language, would Selyse even like agree to talk to. And it's, you know, for all of Jon's like, oh, I'm a bastard, I'm nobody, I'm at the bottom of the totem pole, he's not. He's very privileged in the way he's able to deal with this, and I think that does rub off on his ideas and actions.
Just to pick up on the acculturation idea, I wonder if there's a way that we could think about him, and I know this is done a lot, but specifically from that point versus Dany, and how right around this same time she's, or at least in the book, not necessarily in the timeline, she is actively shedding her tokar and floppy ears, and so she kind of comes to resent those. And I wonder if on some very uncomfortable level we could suggest that the meritocracy of the Night's Watch is Jon's floppy ears, which is a weird thing to say, but that he might be seen as having, and we see his resistance to that meritocracy at the beginning too, and he doesn't want to be a steward, and Sam has to explain that it's not, you know, insulting, and it's not beneath him, and it's not, and then he kind of seems to come into that, but maybe now this is his true self coming back in the way that Dany's does.
I submit that we see the anti-meritocracy of the Night's Watch in the very first chapter of A Game of Thrones, when Waymar Royce is able to lead a ranging, even though he's unqualified and inexperienced, but he is a lordling's son, so he gets it.
Yeah.
And also, while we're still in this chapter, does anyone want to get into the character of Alice Karstark? Because she actually comes across as pretty boss woman, I think. Or do people just not like her?
No, she's awesome. When
I love her.
Yeah, when he asks her if she's not afraid, and she's like, well, let him be afraid of me. It's like, yay, you go, girl. She's awesome.
Yeah, she was.
In my head, I always think of this as the Alice Karstark chapter.
Yeah.
So they jump over a pit of fire. Is that like jumping the broom or something? For like, we've never seen a red marriage before, have we?
Yeah, I think it's just like a symbol, like they're passing through the fire together, so they're melded or whatever. Like,
Two crossed over the fire, one emerges.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I'm
Fiery
surprised
loins, fiery loins, fiery.
Right.
I'm surprised that George went that way instead of like what I've seen a lot of weddings where two people hold the candles and then light the one candle kind of thing.
Oh, the unity candle.
Whatever the fuck it's called.
That's what it's called. Yes, that's what it's called.
So which religions have that in it then? I've not seen that before.
So that's actually, from what I know, now it comes from black slaves in America, and they'd jump over a broom to mark the final act of getting married. And I think it's still carried on in some African American weddings, and I don't know if it originated in Africa or not, but that's jump the broom is one of the wedding things. It's a unity broom.
Unity broom.
Yeah, I think the candle thing is like just a bougie.
It is.
Modern.
Yeah, I think it's like pouring sand into
the sand thing. Like they're like, we're gonna make this sand art together, and it's gonna be this thing of our unity, and we're gonna put it on our fireplace thing, and it's gonna last
the
forever.
candle is nice though. Like because it is like a anyway.
Well, I mean, there are like candles in some cultures that like it has to be kept burning at both ends, like the night of the wedding or something, or I read that in a novel, and that's not true.
I think.
Or I just made that up.
Candle, I think the candle thing is also probably, at least like symbolically drawn from the idea of like lighting a church candle for the people that can't be there, right? Or like a memory candle or something like that. So it's like it's a familial inclusion as well as, I don't know.
And Melisandre's, hold my beer. Here's a bonfire.
Hey, can we just talk about what's up with Sir Patrick of King's Mountain here?
He wants him a woman.
Well, but he's like, well, you know, his lands were lost when he came up here, so he thinks that should be him. It's like, well, what do you have to offer? You just said your lands were lost. Like the whole point is like they're making an alliance. He's like, well, I've got me.
Yeah, it's really weird that all these people that bitch about how cold it is, like especially in like Stannis's party and stuff, like want to marry in and get lands in the north all of a sudden, like they could hang.
Yeah, it's just bizarre.
Sorry,
I
to
think
kill the
it's just
combo.
Power grab, as always. Like I don't think there's much more to it than like, you know, I'm a knight and I deserve the pretty girl and I can tame the wildling princess.
Right, they
have a lot
want to be recognized. They want Jon to give them these favors, but they like obviously have really nothing to offer.
I mean, there's a lot of storytelling that's going on, I think, in everybody's minds. And that's something that's not unique in A Song of Ice and Fire, but like, you know, Jon has his story about his storyline. And, you know, I think he's just coming across these men who also have their own versions of the story that don't go the same way.
The Song of Sir Patrick of King's Mountain.
Yeah. Also, George lost a bet and needed to have him in there. So.
And everyone's the hero of their story, right? That's the moral of these chapters. It's the moral of this book. Where, you know, you've got Dany, Stannis, Jon. We've talked about all these different people trying to forge these alliances and keep the peace and losing the peace, right? Because everyone in their head thinks what they're asking for is reasonable and everyone should understand they have no other choice and everyone should just get it. And if you're Jon, I get that the wildlings like this and they're not going to bend the knee. And I get that, like, why don't you all just get it? And I think we've all been in situations in life where we have that frustration. Like, why don't you just understand what I'm facing and what is happening here? Why don't you get it? And it's such a, you know, it's this fantasy novel, but it's such a human thing, which I think is why it's so gripping and moving to us, maybe.
That's basically my entire job, is just saying, why can't you get this? Why don't you understand? We're in a pandemic. No, we can't take in any new visa people.
But it's a real skill, isn't it? And it's a corporate skill. You can go on executive education training courses of how to reason with irreconcilable factions and get them to a commonality, or at least get them to a space where they think you have heard their grievances and they will respect the decision you've made, even if they don't get why you've made it. And that is the course Jon needs to go on, the change management executive education course.
A lot of people just want to know that they're being heard. Like at the end of the day, a lot of people can accept that what's going to happen is going to happen. They can't control it. They're not going to get their outcome. But it's much worse when your leadership is like, well, fuck you, and you're not going to get the outcome. When they're like, well, I hear what you're saying. I really value your opinion, but
You're still not
we can't go that way.
Oh my god.
And-
No, but
there
the
are people
idea
that
is
are
that if you
effective
respect
at doing
me,
that.
if you've lived with me through decisions I've taken in the past, and you recognize that I've built up some social capital, you will go with me on this and trust me that you'll figure it out later of why it
Yeah.
was right. And the problem with John is he hasn't built up any social capital. He's got no one to lobby for him. But a lot of what you learn on those
He
courses,
sends all his social capital away.
exactly.
But is
what
that is that not precisely what he accomplishes with Tormund? I mean, isn't
the problem is
not
he
that
needs to accomplish it with Tolmond and Bowen March and with Selyse. So he achieves it with like 1 out of 3 or 4 people he needs to do
Yeah.
so.
I mean, like all his social
Which ain't
capital is
bad.
on the wrong side of the wall.
Yeah,
is
it
usually-
feels like because he was voted the Lord Commander, he didn't really want it in the first place. But he's like, well, they voted for me. So
don't
to
want
him,
it.
he was like, yeah, you don't want it. But to him, it's like, they voted for me, so I'm done with them. I don't need to keep like earning, from them. Like, they voted for me. He's like, I need to keep convincing the wildlings. I need to get them on my side. But he doesn't realize that there's a lot of people that didn't vote for him.
Right. He
And-
thinks
and
he's
you-
been giving a mandate or something.
Yeah,
because
and
he's-
you'd think he would have learned his lesson with Mormont that your men can actually turn against you.
And what's nuts is he references Mormont and he will say things like, I remember my dad said that you should sit with your men at dinner and hear them and be one of them and know your men. Like, he knows all the executive education change management points. He doesn't do them because I guess he doesn't have time, or especially when we get to the final chapter in the John arc, that he's so angry he doesn't. But it's just tragic to me because he knows what he needs to do. He comments on Rob, he comments on his dad, he comments on Jorah internally, and yet he doesn't do what he needs to do.
See, I think he thinks he's doing that. Like, I really do. And I think he's just like, it's enough that, again, the narrative that, like, I know that I'm doing this, even if the men don't, like, understand it right now, they'll get it eventually, or, the others will attack and it won't even matter. So it's like he's only fighting on one front.
And that's the tragedy of
And-
senior management. Like, if ever you do an employee engagement survey, the
Oh,
senior
Jesus
managers,
Christ.
the senior managers always think that they are explaining and running town halls and explaining the company vision, like, as much as they need to, or way more than they need to. And then you see the same employee engagement survey to the bottom echelons of the company will always say they don't understand it, they don't get enough information, they don't get enough communication.
Oh my
It's
god,
true.
this is like every
Oh my
teaching evaluation I've ever.
This is my life.
Oh my god, everyone's getting PTSD here.
Right.
Guys, do like me and don't work with other humans.
Well, now, yeah.
I will for the next 6 to 8 weeks.
Well, let's hope that this all works out for the best. And shall we move on to John 11 and see whether it does?
Oh, I'm sure it gets better in the next chapter.
Let's go.
We voyage, hopefully.
I mean, he can't make more bad decisions, right?
No.
All right.
Challenge accepted.
I'm just going to take this off the wiki because I have a lot more questions and that I'd want to propose to the group than I really care about the summary, if that's okay. John treats with Tormund Giantsbane. His 4,000 wildlings will be allowed to pass the wall, including mammoths and giants. They must leave 100 boys as hostages at Castle Black and yield all valuables to pay for food. The mammoths are to go the long way around through Eastwatch, while the rest are allowed through the gates. John accompanies Val to see Queen Selyse to tell her of her bargain. The queen is excited and tells him that her husband will be proud. All the wildlings have to do is swear fealty to the king and convert to R'hllor. This is when John tells her that wasn't part of the bargain, and Val adds that the free folk do not kneel. Selyse is quite upset about this. Val notices Shireen's facial disfigurements, noting that it's a gray death. John tells her that it's not always fatal, but she is adamant that it is death, and that the baby monster must be taken out of that tower at once and closer to her own person. She insists that Shireen is dead and the queen, and apparently John cannot see it. He then goes to the top of the wall, wondering what has happened to Mance Rayder and if he has found his sister Arya. Up there, he meets Torrin Flint of the First Flints and Brandon Norrie of the Norrie clan. John tells them that the wildlings are coming through, though they're not happy about it because of past conflicts. He tells them that they must forgive crimes of the past if they are to live together. They are worried about their lands, but John tells them the wildlings are to remain on the wall in the abandoned castles. Bowen Marsh sees this agreement as a betrayal of Jon's vows to the Night Watch. However, Jon says that he is sworn to defend the realms of men and asked him whether the people beyond the wall don't count as men. Thus, it is his intent to use all available resources to defend the realm of men against the others.
Are any of you all watching the Amazon Prime series, or I guess it's CBS or something else in America called Picard, the new Star Trek series?
Nope.
I only saw the
On
first
now?
episode.
Well, the whole series is this isn't a spoiler because it's set up in the first episode, is about how there was this species of people. I think it's Klingons. I don't know. I'm not really into it, but Philip's a big Star Trek fan, so now I have to watch it and pretend like I'm interested. And they're in like real,
He's so angry.
yeah, and they're in like real trouble, and Starfleet basically abandons them, and Picard like goes against them and says, "We have to save them. We have
Yeah,
to try
it's
and
the
rescue
Romulans,
them."
that's
The
what it
Romulans,
is.
there you go. And it's literally this. And just hearing you describe this, Matt, I was like, "Oh my God! Did the writers of Picard, did Michael Chabon, and did they just basically read this chapter and think, you know what? We could set this in a sci-fi world and make this." Basically exactly the same argument. So what counts as men, right? What counts as us? It's so relevant to today's times and today's politics about the others and people coming in and who do we save and who can we sustain and who can we feed. I find this like scarily apt for right now, but we don't want this to get too political, so I'll probably end it there. But my
Well,
goodness.
I think that, to not get political, the others are literally the others, and men
Yeah.
are the wildlings on the other side of the wall.
Are the others literally the others?
Right.
Like the ones made of snow, the snowmen.
Yeah.
Are they not men? Because they're made
Maybe. I don't know. Anyway, there's a couple parts of this chapter that have been kind of touched on the last discussion, and I guess I'll pick that up now with Jon, and about his oaths and how he kind of plays fast and loose with it and makes it work for him when he needs to, because he references, like, after his dealings with Tormund, he's like, I guard the realms of men, and I'm the guard that let the enemy in. And then at the end of the chapter, he uses the oath against Bowen Marsh to say, who are these men? Like, we need them. Like, that is our vow. And that is after Bowen Marsh uses the word. It's what you're saying is treason.
I mean, it is treason, right? Are any of us disputing that it's treason, but it might also still be the right thing to do?
I don't think it's treason when you make a peace with someone. When you make a peace with your enemy, there are concessions on both sides, and that's what makes the peace. And I don't think that making peace is treason. Stannis thinks otherwise.
Like treason to the Seven Kingdoms or treason to the Night's Watch?
Well, for Bowen Marsh, the only consideration is treason to the Night's Watch, right?
But if Jon is the Lord Commander, how can he be treason himself?
Yeah,
right? Like, I mean,
there's no structure. I mean, there's a structure, obviously, but there's
Right.
no like instance except for Jon. He's the only one. He's the one deciding. There's no other power really. So what does that mean for it to be treason? Like,
so by that reading, the only treason is when he decides to go south and asks people to go with him. That's the treason.
I think
that's
so.
definitely the
Because,
end of it. I feel
like-
like the problem with the Night's Watch is that they view themselves as like their enemy is the wildlings, when like he should be playing up like, well, that's been our enemy because the others were gone. Our enemy is the others, not the wildlings. But he doesn't really play that out.
The issue is, if you want to go kind of political in a sense, or rather, if you're talking about treason, you're talking about rules and laws and or someone that you can commit treason against. And in this case, it would be the vows, I guess. But it's such a small it's such a small thing. It's not a big constitution or set of laws. So it's really complicated, I think, to talk of treason when someone of the Night's Watch deserts or goes off and gets married or something like that. It's much more clear. But in this case, I don't think we can call it treason, really.
Well, I mean, I think the way treason is viewed by the men like who are using the term are you know, they're including the wildlings in the Night's Watch vows, and like it's very letter of the law versus spirit of the law, and they think that like, of course the wildlings are like basically just in there, you know, like there might as well be like, I am the shield that guards the realms of men against the wildlings, you know. But John is interpreting it more literally and more, you know, letter of the law. So I think that's really the problem, because if you have people who consider like one train of thought and one kind of practice like absolutely irrevocably, you know, the law and legal, and then you have other people who disagree with like even the like the thought process that brings you to that, then I don't know, you're in a situation where it's very hard to talk to people, especially when they've thought that same thing for many years and think that people have followed that same thing for 8,000 years before you.
Yeah, I think it's difficult when most people on the Night's Watch, and this excludes John, like think of the wildlings as like something that is as bad as John thinks of the others, essentially. So when you get them there, they're not only like mad at John about this, but they're also scared. They're also just like angry at the whole thing. They, you know, their normal response when they see a wildling is to kill them. You know, it's very complicated emotions with all of this.
But what I've never understood is how they could view the wildlings any different than the Iron Islanders. Because the Islanders are reaving up and down coasts. Like, we know this because Asha, who's young, is already famous for reaving. Like, how are these marauders like any different than the Iron Islanders? I don't understand.
Well, they're foreigners.
They're on the other side of the wall.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the wall has been changed in its symbolism, and so like the wall becomes like a concrete reminder of the fact that there are people on the other side of it, and that was never its original intention. But in the same way that people have forgotten that the White Walkers exist, they've forgotten like why the wall is really there and what it's really doing. And I don't know, I keep thinking about that, saying that tradition is just peer pressure from dead people. Like, I mean, I think that's kind of what's happening here, where it's like, no, this is as far back as they can go in living memory, which I think is officially like 3 or 4 generations, maybe. Like, that has been the understanding of how these things are interpreted and what they symbolize, is that it's a barrier against the wildlings. And I think on a sort of a meta narrative level, this is another really good example of the painful faultiness of human memory, which has been, you know, emerging as a theme in a lot of these rereads that we've done. But you know, just because you don't remember why the wall was built doesn't mean that why you think it was built is the new reality. Like, I don't know. It's just,
I mean, to be fair, also it's tough to have like a 16-year-old be like, no, here's what your oath means. I know. And like, I agree that John's right, but it's, you know, when you're dealing with institutionalized ideas or ideas that people believe are institutionalized, and you have people who have been like on the wall for like 50 years, you know, it's a tough rock to push up a very slippery hill.
Is he the guy who just read Nietzsche for the first time?
Yes. Or he's like those like Teach for America people who are like, no, let me tell you how to educate.
Right.
Oh dear. So in your minds, when does the conspiracy begin here or not here?
I think it has to. I think right after he's given all the orders that the Night's Watchmen
right.
start planning.
I think it was in the last chapter technically, but when after like Axel Florent like goes and talks to John like super angry about stuff, and then like the wildlings come in, and I think that like he goes back to his posse and he's just like, we're done. This is it.
Okay. Anything else on this specific chapter, or shall we crack on with the next one?
Can I bring up a couple other things?
Yes, please do.
Okay, so we get the most Tormund of Tormundses that ever Tormund in this chapter. We haven't seen him since really Storm of Swords, and he's just great. I love him. And I don't know if it's having a kid now or what, but his story about having to put down his son who became a white was particularly moving to me.
Agreed.
Also, his so going back to like the heraldry of the wildlings, he says his arm torques were his father's and his father's before that. I wonder if that was like some kind of heraldry. Val comes over as like a complete princess and very motherly because she wants her monster back, but she's also very hard in regards to Shireen, who she says is a dead person.
Yeah, that's a fun note there.
Yeah.
Yeah. That person's dead, even though she's definitely not technically dead.
Yeah, so it made me think more about like what role maybe Grayscale will play in the future, if any. I think the focus on the fact that Val said that indicates that Grayscale might have a bigger role to play, especially if maybe if again knowledge that people forgot means that even though you may be cured, quote, from Grayscale, you can still transmit it or something like that.
I think the Maesters are batting pretty low at this point, right? So I think at this point in the narrative, when anybody says like, well, the Maesters say like, maybe they don't really, maybe there's more things in heaven and earth, Horatio. Like, you need to catch up a little bit. And I agree that like the emphasis that they put on here, we're almost invited to dismiss it the way that John does, and I think that we're invited to do that because it's a setup, like because it's a mistake to dismiss it. Speaking
of Maesters, Clytus is subbing in as a Maester for the time being, and John says he'll serve until Sam returns. How long does John think that it takes to become a Maester? Like he says that like, it won't be too long till Sam gets back. Like we'll make do without like, our person who knows how to send communications and heal brothers, like it'll be some kind of short time.
Yeah, he's not doing like an AA, and he's not getting an associates in maestering. He's going to be
right. He's not going to the DeVry Institute of Maestering.
Right, exactly. Like it's not a,
It seems crazy to me, like that there's no one else, even before, like there's no one else than Maester Aemon who has this ability, who can heal and like it seems a bit weird that there's no other system in place. And when he dies and Sam goes to the Citadel, it's completely unrealistic to think that we'll make do.
Crescent had an understudy at Dragonstone. Like, why wasn't that already in place at the Wall?
Yeah.
The impression that Aemon was like he happened to be a maester and then he went to the Wall. I didn't get the impression that the Citadel regularly supplied maesters to the Night's Watch.
Well, okay,
he went to the Wall with Bloodraven.
Yes, but he was a maester before. It's not like there's always a maester in the Night's Watch, or at least it's not said. But so if there's not, like who else can be the healer?
You would think they would be a little bit more pro field medicine, at least, right?
Yes.
Like that they would want the guys to have a basic idea. Like all the Rangers should know whatever the equivalent of CPR is at this point. Like how to keep someone's leg from falling off until you get them back to their, camp
keep
or whatever. Like, right?
Yeah.
I kind of thought there was always some kind of reason why Aemon was up at the Wall, potentially, that we just don't know yet. Maybe something from a Duncan Egg book. But
I think it's hinted at, like after he turns down.
He went to the Wall because they wanted to make him king, and he went to the Wall so that he wouldn't be king, and then stayed at the Wall so he wouldn't be tempted to later.
But also, I think, what's the guy that's going over to help Danny now? Says like, there's a reason they sent Aemon to the Wall. Like they couldn't have him be a Grand Maester or something like that.
The Marwyn.
And then the last thing I have is that Val and maybe wildling women trim their pubic hairs because she states that Celise has more hair on her face than she has between her thighs.
That would be stupid for warmth purposes.
I think that was more a comment on Celise's
Yeah,
face.
man.
Yeah, I understood that as really just an insult.
Oh my gosh, stop mansplaining to us.
Sorry.
Does this feel like it's time to move to John 12?
Sure. I think
pubic
once we
hair, so yes, please.
Okay, so this takes place 3 days later on August 17th.
So this chapter is pretty low on plot, but extremely rich on atmosphere. A raven wakes John from a dream of a lonely battle against the others, and he gets ready to undertake one of the most monumental days in the history of Westeros. Breakfasting with his officers, he warns them that tensions will be high, and that if any hostilities break out, heads will roll if they are started by the Night's Watch. Dolorous Ed is, as always, dolorous and is in charge of taking the Spearwives to Long Barrow. He notes that the good weather means that the wall will be weeping today. John and his men exit the tunnel to beyond the wall, where Tormund and his wildlings are waiting. He orders the gate opened, and the horn is blown once. Wildlings are coming. First, the boy hostages pass through, which include a naked boy, 2 girls in disguise, Varamir Sixskins' surely ill-begotten son, and Tormund's youngest son. Then the warriors come through the gate, which Tormund has arranged so that the Night's Watch can't close the gate behind the women and children and leave the warriors on the other side of the wall. This is interesting to me because it's part of Tormund's part of the friendly but very intense negotiations that are ongoing between Tormund and Jon. Many of them do swear allegiance, and all of them give their treasures to Bowen Marsh. At some point, somebody gives an ivory phallus because this was written by George R. R. Martin. So, yeah. The contingent from the Stony Shore comes next, and everybody agrees that they're just super weird. Later in the day, a wagon gets wedged in the tunnel, and Jon has to help defuse the tension. Tormund complains about the width of the gate, and he wishes he could blow the Horn of Joramun to blow down the wall and make it easier. Jon tells him that Melisandre has burned the Horn of Joramun, but Tormund laughs that the horn man's passed off as the HOJ was just a big horn they found in a giant's grave, used as a threat. Jon wonders where the real horn is, in a very dun-dun-dun moment. Later, it begins to snow, and tensions continue to rise, culminating in a stabbing. Jon asks Tormund about the others, but Tormund doesn't want to say much on that side of the wall. However, he does. That he tells him that on their way south, the wildlings were not outright attacked, but were sort of nibbled at and harried by the walkers. Tormund warns that the dead can be fought, but their masters are another matter. Can your sword cut cold, he asks, and Jon thinks we will see. As the day wanes, Tormund sends his son Torrig to roust the last of the wildlings. Jon realizes that the wildlings, even the fiercest among them, are afraid to stay beyond the wall as night is falling. Snow begins to fall, and Jon sees smoke rising from the woods. Torrig is burning the corpses of the dead wildlings. Finally, Tormund and his rearguard go through, including a skin changer named Boric with a boar who immediately does not get on well with Ghost. Jon goes back through the gate last. Bowen Marsh is unhappy, even after counting all of the treasure, but Castle Black is alive with people in a way that Jon has never seen before. Jon retires to his rooms and receives a message from Clytus. It's from Cotter Pike. Things are going extremely badly on the Hardhome mission. Pike has lost ships and men. The wildlings are eating their own dead, and he cites dead things in the woods, dead things in the water. Night falls, Jon thinks, and now my war begins. This is a great chapter.
Horn of Joramun
really
theories, go. Sam has it.
It's Sam, right?
Is that kind of like just accepted as fact?
I can never keep track of who has what horn, to be honest with you.
Victorian has one and Sam has the other, I think, is accepted.
And do you think Tormund will blow it? Because he is Tormund Hornblower.
One would hope so, but it's got to get from Sam to Tormund, which seems a long way off right now.
Don't they try and blow it and it doesn't work, but they can't figure out why? When they first find the horn?
There's a fake horn, isn't there? Like Mance has a horn that he claims is the horn of Joramun, but it really isn't.
And the horn that Sam has is broken.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like it literally won't toot. Like it, it's unblowable.
It just gets better and better.
Yeah.
I'm remembering that
something
thing
I've been
that
called.
says. Doesn't she like kind of cry to Jon at one point that they opened up so many graves looking for Joramun's horn and they never found it?
Yeah, so and then Tormund later says, yeah, we didn't find it either. So 2 people have told him that they didn't find it. Mance is obviously a known liar and slippery. Sam potentially has it. So that's the state of affairs, I think.
But also digging up those graves apparently unleashed the White Walkers, right?
She says, all those shades we let out into the world or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
could either be her being superstitious or could just be like, well, now there's dead people with the door open.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was just like you really shouldn't fucking dig up people's graves. Like, that's just not
Don't do that.
cool. Yeah, right. Like, I mean, that's, it's pretty cross-cultural, I think. Like, it's just bad news.
I love Tormund. I want to be friends with him. I'll drink mead at Ruddy Hall.
I kind of, he annoys me, but like
I could see that too.
What?
I could see that.
Yeah, I mean it's a little much, but I do appreciate when he does get those emotional moments, like you mentioned, Matt. The thing he says about his youngest or one of his sons who died, who he wasn't much of a man, but I loved him anyway, and like that is a really interesting microcosm to me of like wildling demands on masculinity versus like actual, love between a father and a kid.
He's like, but he was my little boy. And it's like, oh my God. Like, no matter what my daughter turns into, like right now, she's like my baby girl.
Dead things in the water theories. Go. I mean, is it corpses in the water? Is this some kind of waterborne version of White Walkers? What is going on at Hardhome?
Well, if somebody dies
I just
and
think
gets
that
thrown overboard, would they come back? Like, what's the radius on other resurrection? Because like, are the people who die on the ships, like in those scuffles, wouldn't they come back?
We will see.
I just keep thinking of both Pirates of the Caribbean and that scene in Two Towers where they're going through the marshes.
Yeah.
Isn't dead things in the water like a literal quote from Lord of the Rings?
I think so. That's what I was about to say. I think just these words just bring immediately the imagery, because I think they're exactly used in this way in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, in my chapter 2, they mention oaken shield and a sword being reforged.
So this isn't some Pirates of the Caribbean bullshit going on.
I can't get that image out of my head though. Like just the skeletons marching.
The dead things in the water are probably just others or White Walkers, just maybe I assume they don't have to breathe, so they can probably just go in the water and be like, ooh, there's people. And yeah.
Unless they're also like undead kraken and fish.
Or just like fish or something that's died. Like, I don't know. That's what I'm curious, is if maybe the others coming is like starting to kill the aquatic life in the area.
I love the idea that it's literally just like some angry, cod or something. Just like some blue-eyed cod just coming for you.
Aye, North Atlantic cod, dangerous.
Some like real pissed off narwhal.
Some undead octopus.
I'll take care of the pissed off
undead
narwhal.
octopus.
They don't even have bones. I don't know how it would work.
Well, something I noticed going back to the very beginning of the chapter is that when John is dreaming, there's an interesting sort of two things that go together very quickly, which the word is escaping me right now. He's dreaming and he kills Ygritte, and he takes Rob's head off, and then it says a gnarled hand seized John roughly by the shoulder. He whirled and woke with a raven pecking at his chest. Snow, the bird cried. And like for some reason I was like, was Bloodraven in the dream? Like, is that Bloodraven's hand?
Ooh, creepy.
Yeah.
Well, especially because the Raven calls him Jon Snow right after that, and he's like, well, that's weird.
Yeah. And he's like, King
Jon Snow.
I don't know what that means.
Yeah, everyone knows that's not my name.
And if that's Bloodraven's hand in the dream, is that Bran actually not Bloodraven?
I mean,
don't know.
With all the time stuff, it could be, because it says a gnarled hand, so like it makes you think of like an old person. But like this could be Bran 3,000 years from now. Like who knows?
Oh, it's a time travel Bran.
This could be the way he projects himself, like consciously or not. That's how. The kind of mind mingling of Bran with Bloodraven and Jon happens, because it's not clear. Like he doesn't see Bran or anyone. He just feels he has this gnarly hand that could be just the way the dream and the magic mingle.
Or I guess gnarled hand could be like referring. Like he thinks it's a hand, but it's a tree branch. Like it's you can use that language.
Well, in the Theon chapter that we just talked,
Bloodraven / Bran woke John up from this dream for some reason.
just about the hand thing, Theon refers to the weirwood leaves in the Godswood as little red hands. I don't know if that's maybe what you're going for.
Yeah, could be. The dream kind of turns from him fighting the dead to him like, I am the Lord of Winterfell, you know, like him reliving his failures and stuff. So I don't know if maybe that was something that they didn't want him to be experiencing then, or, you know, this is very off the beaten path.
That aspect of it is an interesting juxtaposition to the dreams that he has earlier about the crypt and how he's not welcome there, and like the Feast of the Dead and stuff like that. Like this seems like a much more, and that this may speak to what we were saying earlier about his kind of reversion to the feudal way of things, and his feeling that he's, you know, climbing the ladder or whatever, that now he feels like he might be in a position to lay claim, like he's earned a claim to Winterfell, and in opposition to Robb that he maybe didn't feel was allowed to him before, or that he was entitled to before, which could be very problematic as far as his development goes.
This is Jon's biggest flex, really. You know, like he's changing history in this moment, which is something that, like, even all the, you know, revolutionary radical stuff he's done before has not been to this degree. And so it's interesting that, like, it's still for him is somewhat linked to his relationship with power, you know?
I agree. I'm wondering if the exact moment when the conspirators decide to go for him is when they see people, wildlings, people they don't consider people, coming through the wall, swearing an oath, the same one that Tormund makes, and that this is basically looking like they're swearing to Jon in person. And that it feels like a personal fealty, and that he is building up a personal wildling army, and that is what really tips him over the edge. So yes, of course, marching south confirms all their worst suspicions, but they can't suddenly stab him on the back of that. I think it would take a bit more time, and I think it's this all day, that long day of seeing wildlings walk in, swearing whatever oath it is in the words that Tormund used, that feel personal to Jon. Hail Caesar, the man who... And it just really reminds me of Caesar. I mean, I think it's meant to, right? The way he's taken down is very much how Caesar was taken down in the Senate. But this whole wildlings processing in was very eerie to me. And I thought, yeah, this might have tipped me if I felt I were loyal to the Night's Watch.
It's a really interesting contrast also, because Jon, like, you know, I agree, there's something very ominous. The end of the chapter is really a mix of very ominous things and very, like, positive things, because he talks about, like, you know, everything, light now shown through windows where John's never seen, where there are people playing, like, they're playing in the snow, they're throwing snowballs, like, it's very wholesome. And this idea of renewal, you know, and then, but that comes right after, you know, Bowen Marsh is like very annoyed at everything. And then the last line of the chapter is, now my war begins, which also, you know, like, it's one thing to say now my watch begins, but it's entirely different. And when you think about it in the context of, like, amassing a personal wildling army, that is definitely something that, obviously they don't know Jon's thinking this, but, like, yeah, it's not the best look.
Right. It shows how singular his vision is, right? That he can't see all these other things happening. He thinks everyone's on board with them, like they're going to fight the others, and that's the main objective, and he doesn't read the room.
Yeah. And he doesn't have a meeting, you know, like, he doesn't debrief anybody, you know, like that, like, he's an ideas guy. He's not a people manager. And, like, which is funny because he partly gets the job on the strength of his being a people manager. But, you know, like, what if he had brought Bowen Marsh and the rest of them, like, what if they had regathered the council that he had that morning? It's not really council, he's telling them what to do, but, like, you know, and been like, okay, how do we think this went? What do we need to watch out for? What do you think, Bowen Marsh? How much money do you think we got from this? Like, I wonder, you know, again, there's a certain degree of, like, kicking the can down the road toward an inevitable violent outbreak here, but, like, I do wonder if he might have been able to mitigate some of the bad feelings, because, like, if they felt like they could be like, dude, you're making a king and everybody just making yourself a king and everybody just swore to you and, like, blah blah blah, like, Jon has no opportunity to respond to that because he has no idea that they're thinking that, because he doesn't give them the opportunity to say that. which doesn't mean that they would, but like.
Yeah.
He needs
Not
to
that I
circle
could have
back.
done any better at 16.
Yeah, but this is also a martial order, like the Night's Watch.
That's
So
true.
an order is given, you follow it. You don't ask why. The fact that he even involves some of these other people, like, why? Anyway, he's the leader. Like, they have to fall in line.
It's weird that there's like a little bit of a gap in the Night's Watch vows that everybody takes very seriously, but somehow like assassinating the Lord Commander doesn't seem to be covered in all of these.
Going to Molestown.
Yeah.
Well, because they're killing a traitor. Like that's where the question that we were just asking comes in, because like if they're executing a traitor the way that he executed Janos Slynt, which is clearly what they believe they're doing, then what they're doing is arguably justified, or just at least. But how can he commit treason against himself? Like, I mean, their execution, their murder of Lord Mormont was clearly treason, because they were stabbing up the chain, but like, which you can't do. But yeah, I don't know.
Stabbing up the chain.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just checks and balances of the Night's Watch.
Yeah, I think. I mean, to have it come off as legitimate, they should have had him arrested and tried him and then executed him. But this seems like a kind of thug job killing.
I'm just saying that like 2 executed Lord Commanders in a row doesn't bode well for institutional stability.
No, I don't.
Or an avalanche of job applications, one imagine.
Well, to be honest, I mean, I feel like they won't have a problem with that, because nobody thinks they're going to be the one. Nobody involved in an assassination is going to be like, oh, I have to worry now. I'm right.
Isn't it one of the free cities like Pentos or something, where like the prince will be like hacked into quarters if like a crop fails or something like that? But
I think there's one where they just schedule their assassinations. Like, yeah.
Isn't that why the tattered prince quit? Because he didn't want to be. No, I'm serious.
Yeah, no, that's ringing a bell. Yeah.
Yeah. He was like, no, I don't want to be your. No. Like.
Agree. Anything else in this chapter specifically?
I found the moment with Borak incredibly moving. I thought that was like the high point of this chapter for me, although I did also very much enjoy when they were playing with the snowballs. But where he thinks that the boar is going to charge, because he's so used to operating in this very oppositional mode with all these negotiations and these power moves and being the outsider and being the one who's really kind of clawing his way forward, and he just assumes that this massive boar is coming to attack him, and instead it bows his head, and the other skin changer greets him as a brother. And I thought that one word was so beautiful and so freighted also, because he theoretically has brothers in the Night's Watch. Rob was sort of his brother. Like, it's for him, that one word touches on so many sort of open wounds, I guess, for him to put it.
And it kind of confirms his argument, like, are these men, who are these? Like, when he calls them a brother, they're against a common enemy. They're against a common, they have a common idea of what life should look like or something, it just humanizes them even more.
Well, and the fact that it comes from a skin changer too, I think speaks to John's exceptionality in a whole nother respect, right? So that he would be recognized probably more truly than he was as a brother by the Starks, or more truly than he was by the brothers of the Night's Watch, as a kindred spirit or as family, by this person who shares the same supernatural ability that he does. I don't know. I thought it was a really beautiful moment, and I almost wish he had taken it more to heart. I
agree. I thought so too, that it was really beautiful, but at the same time, I feel like it's also like just a recognition of what and who John is, and the fact that he is a skin changer as well. And it's interesting that like John knows also before the guy shows up that he is a skin changer. I mean, he sees it, he feels it, that he is, and he takes that like without question. It's like, okay, I know that he's a skin changer. I don't know how, but I do, which is interesting because most of the Stark kids don't really vocalize the fact that they are skin changers.
Well, I think that's one of the things that's so remarkable about John's storyline or character arc that we see, I think, contrasted most dramatically with Danny, where his contact with this world that so many people regard as completely other is what allows him, or it gives him a space to really be who he actually is. And I mean, I think the supernaturality is a part of that, but also his sort of fierce determination to do what's right by as many people as he can. I mean, he denies so frequently that he's half a wildling, but I think that his exposure to, you know, the wildling way of being really opens him up to some of these aspects of himself that he's been either unaware of or actively denying. And I don't know. I mean, I hope going forward, like he has more of a chance to come to terms with that. I don't know.
Yeah, segmented and like conflicting identities are definitely something that haunt John throughout his life experience.
Yeah, I mean, I just think, like, in contrast with Danny, where she sort of very fiercely clings to the way that she defines herself, even though she really has, you know, no more definition than he does. I think he's doing it right and she's doing it wrong in whatever way you want to define that. But in that he seems to be becoming more open to his own evolution, and she seems to be shutting down more and more during her experiences in Marine. But
I mean, there's also the fact that like he and this interaction points that out. Like, technically, John has peers. You know, there are other people in the world who are skin changers. There's nobody else in the world who's a dragon rider, and nobody else in the world who's a Targaryen, as far as Danny knows. So, like, I think that is, like, I think isolation, like chosen isolation versus believing that you are isolated versus, you know, whatever. Like, I think that's also a difference that needs to be taken into account, like when we compare John and Danny, because she's been raised to think she's singular, and everything in her life has like been like, no, you're the only one, like really. So I think it's important to
no, I mean, I guess that's part of what, that's very well put. I think that might be part of what made me find this so moving, was that like he actually might have a chance at finding where he truly belongs in a way that maybe she doesn't, right? Like, I don't know. It was a glimmer of hope and kind of a confirmation, I think, at the same time, that like it's okay for him to be what he is, because that's a thing, like, and not just in the skin changing, but I think that that's such a symbol of so many of the other things that he struggles with. That Ghost has capabilities that he doesn't, you know, like he's like, Ghost can see enemies behind smiles that they fake. And I don't know, it's a moment where it's a very pure moment, I think, that he just is recognized, not for what people want him to be or what he wants himself to be, but just for what he is, and what he's done for these people. And I don't know, it was just a really nice moment.
Mm-hmm. Basically, John can join the VOK Skype thread for bastards and skin changers. Danny can't.
Unless my dragon theories are correct, in which case she is welcome to join.
Oh, dear.
I think that's definitely it for the chapter, unless anybody wants to point out their favorite thing that the wildlings tossed into the pile.
Oh, and unicorns.
Yeah.
I love how George is able to world build so efficiently in this one chapter and then drag this entire fucking book out for so many pages. Like, I feel like we get more of a display of wildling culture in this one chapter than, you know, we do over chapters and chapters of Tyrion going through Essos and stuff like that. I don't know. I thought it was really cool, but then when you look back over the entire book, it's like, okay, so he could have edited it down to one succinct chapter.
What was weird reading it today was just seeing how spread out these chapters were, and I felt my reading experience, my understanding was so much better reading these chapters together. And actually with the next episode's Final John chapter, if you just read them as they're written, like this action takes place, you know, in consecutive days and builds very rapidly to this horrific finale, then it's so much more effective. And just seeing, like, you know, this final Jong chapter just comes up against a Cersei chapter, and it's stuff that happened months ago in the linear timeline. And I don't know, I just feel like, not that it always happens, but I feel the linear way of reading it really did add to my enjoyment and understanding in this particular case.
Yeah.
You do have much more of a sense that the brakes have gone out, don't you? Like that he's just, yeah, the inevitability and the kind of careening nature of it is much more clear in this.
Yeah, and
Right, it's not the slow burn.
The intensity of it, and you just, you know, when you're complex decision making with everything going on around you, there's a point at which Melisandre comes up to him and he's like, I just don't have time for you right now. And I feel it must be what it must be like to be a policymaker right now in the midst of the pandemic, like with everything coming at you. How do you stop? And in a sense, although I started this episode saying I judged him more harshly, by the end of it, I had some sympathy, because if you read them consecutively, like you storm through them, then you do get the sense of being overwhelmed by everything that he's facing and thinking, of course, things are going to slip. Yes, he should have maybe done this and that, but in the heat of not battle yet, but pre-battle, everything is kicking off.
Well, I think that's what, like, I think Jon is actually thinking of it like a battle. Like that's where he, you know, really cut his teeth, right? And feels relatively confident. So I think he's approaching this as a battle, and in a battle you have to, well, I say this not knowing anything about strategy, but I'm assuming, having talked to you people for a very long time, that in battles you have to, like, prioritize in very ruthless ways, right?
Yeah, but this is the key thing, right? The reason why that works in battle, and the reason why military discipline is so absolutely drilled into you in peacetime, is that you become so loyal to your troop, to your battalion, to your commander, and so used to unquestionably taking orders, that when you get to that point of the heat of battle and your commander makes a decision that if you actually stopped to think about it you would hate and want to rebel against and start a military coup, you don't, because you're so conditioned to just acting. And the problem for Jon is he's acting like he's in a pitched battle and people will just follow him, and he has not built up any of that reflexive obedience and training. And that's why, although we describe the Wall as being a sort of a military order or a sort of a military house and faction, it's not actually. The discipline is really lax. And I was actually thinking to myself reading this, no wonder the old bear died. And, you know, I know we're seeing the Watch at the end of its days, really, and it's become a sort of a shadow of its former self. But Jon is only reaping what others have sowed, which is the result of decades of neglect and lax discipline, and it's just not going to operate in the way he needs it to operate at this moment of pitched anxiety, and that's not entirely his fault, actually.
Yeah, it is, I think, a crucial difference in approach, and it's understandable that Jon takes that tact. It's just, yeah, I don't know. It's very George in that, like, you're doing the wrong thing, and yet I can understand why you are doing the wrong thing.
That's why George is a great writer.
Well, even just, you know, to go back from a craft, he can be so economic. You know, this chapter's got a couple pages in it, but, like, in terms of world building, it is so succinct, and, like, getting the wildlings through the wall and setting up you know, we have a sense already, but, like, setting up all the dynamics that are going to be at work now that everybody's through, and, like, the things that they brought, you know, the things they carried, literally, it's so well written, and, like, you know, it really is a marked contrast to other points in the story where George, for whatever reason, intentionally, unintentionally, whatever, is simply just not even a fraction as economical. And that's, I think, where stuff gets boring, because if this were 3 chapters, like, if it was a chapter for each section of the wildlings who went through the wall, I think we'd all be tearing our hair out. But,
yeah,
you know, it's not.
No, it's beautifully written, and I would encourage people actually to read these all together. Just do a mini reread. If you did sort of Jon, I would say Jon 9 through to the end. I think it's phenomenal writing, and it really rewards that.
Bina, I know that in the past the representation of Indigenous peoples has been something that's interesting to you, or something that you've kind of touched on in other aspects of George's writing. And I noticed it here, just in the world building with the people from the Stony Shore, I think, or the Frozen Shore. The wildlings are very Anglo-Saxon in a lot of, I mean, we have the torques and the arm rings and things, and they're sort of recognizably cast in that way. And then when we have the people from the frozen shore, they're in dog-drawn sleds and they're wearing seal skins, and they do seem very Inuit or very Sami, and they're the ones who are put up as even wildlings think that they're other, right? And they're, he says the men are bad and the women are worse, and they're savage, and that struck a sour note for me, because it is so marked in a very specific indigenous groups. Like these people, they have black eyes, and they're sort of characteristically accessorized, I guess, or, for lack of a better word, with these very, very specific, sort of circumpolar indigenous peoples, and they are singled out in that way. So I don't know if you want to get into it or not, but it was something that struck me in this world building particularly, and I know that it's something that you've referred to before. But
yeah, no, I think it's a really good point and a great observation, and I'm not sure I can say more about it, just that duly noted and problematic. And then we move forward as always, right? But it's ever present, I guess. Does anyone have anything else on this chapter or all of the chapters? And we can do that, and then I would suggest that I formally close out, and then for those of us who want to stay on and do a bit of how the show treated this canon, those who haven't watched the show can dial off. Does that make sense? So any final thoughts on this chapter or these chapters?
Protect Shireen at all costs. It's not going to work.
She's so sweet.
John did nothing wrong except all the things he did wrong.
And there is the bumper right there.
Guys, 200 giants are going through Eastwatch.
I know.
200.
Epic.
That's so many.
I want to see the giants. I love the way that Celeste's like, can you make the door a bit
They're
wider?
only small giants.
Maybe not. Maybe.
Oh, Celeste is the worst.
She is the worst.
I hate everything about her.
We don't need to get into how awful she is, because it's just obvious and frustrating.
It's there.
Exactly. Okay, well, in that case, that seems like a good place to end on this episode. For those of you listening at home who've dragged your way dim and dirty through to episode 105 to come, the final two chapters remaining are Danny 10 and John 13. Which is kind of, I can't believe it. I can't believe we got to our final two chapters. It's kind of sad and exhilarating all at the same time. In the meantime, you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, iTunes, WordPress by searching for Vassals of Kingsgrave, VOK Podcast. And if you want to get involved, not much left of the reread to get involved in, but if you want to get involved in all the other stuff we talk about, go to a podcast of Ice and Fire and join the forums. Do any of you have any forthcoming episodes you want to pimp out before I wrap up the episode?
We should have the new Potter reread coming out, which covers the second to last section of Goblet of Fire.
Very cool. Okay, so I've been Bina 007. Thank you to Mary, to Michal, to Sara, to Matt, to Adam, to Casey. Did I forget anyone? Hopefully not. Thanks all for joining.
Thanks, Bina.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bina.
Thank you.
And we wish all of you, our lovely podcast listeners, that you stay safe and healthy, and we hope to speak to you soon. Bye.
Night.
Bye, guys. Wash your hands. Stay home. It's all right. I got time. Turns out can't go anywhere for a while.
Right. So can I check? Who's doing John 12?
That would be me.
Excellent. And Varley's kindly volunteered to escape his mother-in-law or mother.
Mother.
They're saying that coronavirus is going to change a lot of things. Maybe it will change the baking.
Apparently 88 couples came out of the Wuhan lockdown and filed for divorce.
I heard the divorce rates were spiking after.
What?
They spiked after 9/11 too.
Really? Right, Casey, you were the one who suggested doing a post-episode Game of Thrones session. So, guys, this is the bit where we are going to talk about Game of Thrones. So if you haven't watched the show and you don't want to be spoiled, then you should definitely stop listening now. So thank you for listening, but go away, run away. Okay. I think it's a good idea as well, Casey, but what specifically did you really want to cover in this section?
Oh man, I mean, mainly Shireen foreshadowing there. I know that's not super recent seasons of Game of Thrones, but That seems like that one chapter with Val calling Shireen dead, very foreshadowy of her eventual death, I assume. In particular, I guess we can talk about that first.
Well, that's interesting to me because the general thought, at least as I'm aware of Shireen's death, is that she's going to be killed like she is in the show, like by Stannis. So I don't know if that has anything to do, like if George is going to connect that to the grayscale in any way.
Yeah,
Right.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. No, I mean, I don't think that, like, when I say, like, reminiscent of the show, I assume that Shireen is going to die, but I don't know, like, if what happens in the show is going to be what exactly happens in the books. I do think that there's, or at least I hope that there's something grayscale related going on, and because we have this whole book.
Yeah, I like I said for my chapter, I'm not sure how grayscale will come into play in the rest of the books, but I did hear that like the showrunners got the Shireen burning directly from George, so it looks like we can look forward to that.
Yeah, in some fashion.
Do you think he does it before the Battle of Winterfell as a good luck charm?
How?
True.
Yeah.
So then why does he need to do it before some final battle as yet unspecified?
Battle with the others?
Jesus.
I think it might be
Maybe Mel has to do it to bring
it's
John
completely
back.
divorced from Winterfell,
Oh,
but I
really?
could be wrong.
So you think
Huh.
Mel does it to bring John back and Stannis doesn't know?
Maybe.
Whoa.
Whoa.
Power
That'd be
Kingsgrave.
fun.
And that could be
Right?
what triggers Stannis to finally break with Mel.
Yeah.
And she's already breaking with him because she now knows he's not Azor Ahai.
Maybe she finds out that Monster isn't Mance's kid anymore, and that's the only King's blood that's left at the wall.
Bloody hell. That's so
Oh.
cool. I now
Isn't
want
it
that
like
to
a
happen.
super important part of Stannis's, like, as I think of it, like it's a very important thing that Stannis makes the choice to have his daughter burned.
I don't think Stannis would make that choice. Though, like I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's not. But he has a level of pragmatism. I feel like a lack of fervor thing that makes that seem characteristically impossible to me.
Yeah,
See,
I
and
almost
I
think
see
that
him,
it'll
like,
be
inching
rather
toward making that decision as he's like talking about like sacrificing different people and like, oh, we're not gonna burn anyone yet, and like, oh, I won't burn Edric Storm yet. Oh, okay, fine, I will burn Edric Storm, and then I see it as like a progression that leads him to being willing to sacrifice his daughter.
I don't know. I think it's more interesting that we've seen Selyse be such a devotee, and like John even says, she would walk into the fire if Mel told her to. But imagine the conflict if Mel tells Selyse that they have to burn Shireen, and then she has to decide, like, because she's not particularly invested in Shireen, but I feel like she's also not a monster.
Well,
so like,
yeah, either in the show, like I could see, what event, like her turn of heart, like they portrayed in the show, happen. Like she's on board and then she actually sees it and can't live with herself afterwards.
Yeah, I can see that happening without Stannis, and I actually think it would be more interesting if it took place in the Wall or at the Wall, like, and she's on one hand wanting to support Stannis, but or Mel, and like following her with this religious, sort of devotion, but bordering on fanaticism, and then she's faced with this. I don't know. I this is all purely speculation on my part, but I think it would be a lot more interesting than if Stannis came back and she was like, oh, by the way, like, I don't know.
The mechanics are definitely complicated right now because Stannis is incommunicado and we're not sure exactly what's going on there. But it's fine. Like, if somebody gets grayscale, you just peel it off.
Ew.
Ooh.
No, yeah.
Remember that scene?
Yes. Vividly.
Eyes.
Ugh.